time is a genuinely crazy concept, because I simply cannot believe that we're already more than a third of the way through the Japanese 1990s. But hey, let's enjoy it while it lasts, because we've got another banger on our hands for 1993. The first major political shift of Japan's post-war era, the birth of Asia's #1 football league, the debut of yet another legendary Japanese sports car, the biggest esports tournament you've never heard of, and... let me just check my notes here. The birth of the devil? Well then, my name is Aniki, and you are watching Timeline Japan. 1990s. Before we get into the thick of it, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you've got a few yen to spare, or euros, dollars, pesos, whatever currency you're working with, then why not swing by this page right here and grab yourself some ad-free content for the low price of just $1 a month. Pretty cool, right? You know what else is cool? Not begging for money. Let's get right into some 1993. Ikimashou. Let's do this. 1993 in Japan did not get off to a particularly smooth start, because on January 15th, Japan's northernmost island of Hokkaido was struck by the first of 2 major earthquakes to hit the region that year. That day, the Ishirō earthquake, centered near the town of Ashirō in the island's eastern half, registered a magnitude of 7.6 and caused severe damage to farm roads, canals, and pipelines, leaving thousands of residents directly impacted, and some even without access to running water. Then there was the fact that it struck in the middle of a Hokkaido winter, which only compounded the misery. Critical structures like dams were buried under the region's notoriously heavy snowfall, making proper inspection impossible until the thaw arrived. In total, 2 people were killed, nearly 1,000 more were injured. The Ishirō earthquake earned its place as a major disaster in every sense of the word. Then, in what was a cruel echo of those January events, a small island just off the western coast of Hokkaido would face something even worse. On July the 12th, Okushiri Island was struck by a magnitude 7.7 earthquake that triggered a devastating tsunami, killing more than 200 people. A haunting number that made 1993 one of the most catastrophic years in the modern history of Hokkaido. January, however, had much better things in store. On the 25th, a major piece of history was made in the world of sumo when Hawaiian-born wrestler Akebono became the first non-Japanese person ever to reach the sport's highest rank of Yokozuna. And deservedly so, I might add. Born under the magnificent name Chadwick Hi-Ho Rowan, Akebono was one of the most distinctive athletes sumo had ever seen. Standing over 2 meters tall and weighing in at a peak of 233 kilograms, he was big even by sumo's already considerable standards. A man seemingly built for the sport, and yet he had only set foot in Japanese sumo wrestling 5 years earlier in 1988. But what followed was a world record speedrun of Japan's national sport. By 1990, he had reached the top division. From there, he developed one of the great rivalries of the era with the Hanada brothers, Wakanohana and Takanohana, both of whom would eventually reach Yokozuna themselves. But 1993, that was entirely Akebono's moment. Back-to-back tournament wins in November of 1992 and January of 1993 sealed it. He was formally promoted to Yokozuna, going where no foreign-born wrestler had ever gone before. Some will argue, and not without reason, that his fellow foreigner Konishiki should have broken that barrier a year prior, but the Yokozuna Deliberation Council saw it differently. In their assessment, Akebono carried himself with the dignity and the humility that the rank demands, qualities that count every bit as much as wins and statistics. And promoting him did prove to be the right call. He remained active for 8 more years following his promotion, fighting through career-threatening injuries throughout, and went on to become one of the longer-serving Yokozuna in the sport's modern history. But beyond the titles and the tournament wins, Akebono's true legacy is the door he opened, laying the groundwork for non-Japanese wrestlers to be accepted at the very pinnacle of sumo. A shift that would later come to define a modern era dominated almost exclusively at the top level by Mongolian athletes. Massive in every sense of the word, in size, in achievement, and in influence, that is Akebono. Then on February the 20th, gaming history was made with the release of the Fujitsu FM Towns Marty. What, you've never heard of the FM Towns Marty? Clearly you've been living under a rock. In all seriousness though, yeah, this thing made exactly 0 dents in the gaming market. Launching exclusively in Japan at a price of 98,000 yen or roughly $710 right in the middle of an economic collapse, it never really had a fighting chance, did it? But here's the thing I was only half kidding about. Gaming history genuinely was made with the FM Towns Marty, because this was the world's first 32-bit home video game console. While Nintendo and Sega were still flexing their measly 16-bit muscles, Fujitsu quietly said, "Hold my sake," and released a system packing not just 32 bits of processing power, but also a 3.5-inch floppy drive and a CD-ROM drive. Now the explanation actually makes a certain kind of sense. You see, the FM Towns Marty was simultaneously a sequel to and a consoleized version of Fujitsu's own FM Towns home computer from 1989. So essentially what you were buying here was a home computer in the shape of a games console, which in theory might justify the price somewhat as well. The market, however, did not care. The FM Towns Marty sold a grand total of 45,000 units before being discontinued in 1995. All despite the release of the FM Towns Marty 2 with a slightly friendlier price tag and, I kid you not, the FM Towns Car Marty. A version designed to be installed in automobiles, complete with a full built-in navigation system. Absolutely extraordinary. As for the FM Towns Marty's game library, actually not half bad. Compatible with much of the existing FM Towns software catalog, the Marty could run hundreds of titles, including solid arcade conversions like the legendary Splatterhouse and Afterburner. Bottom line, the FM Towns Marty didn't change gaming history forever, but it did beat every other 32-bit system to the market, and it remains perhaps my favorite gaming footnote of the entire 1990s. February then closed with the passing of a man who shaped Japanese post-war cinema like almost no one else. Honda Ishirō. Now, you may not immediately recognize the name, but you're absolutely, certainly 100% familiar with his work. Because all the way back in 1954, he directed and co-wrote the original Godzilla, the first entry in what is now the longest-running film franchise in history. But beyond launching that money-printing machine, what Honda created here was one of the defining moments in Japanese film. A special effects landmark, the blueprint of the modern kaiju film, and most strikingly, a genuinely powerful metaphor for nuclear war hitting Japanese cinemas less than a decade after what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It struck a nerve, not just in Japan, but internationally. Nowhere more so than in America, helping Honda become one of the few Japanese filmmakers to achieve genuine influence on Western cinema. Quentin Tarantino, Tim Burton, Martin Scorsese, some of the greatest directors who ever lived, count Honda Ishirō among their biggest inspirations. He continued making monster movies well into the 1970s before stepping away from the director's chair, but he wasn't finished just yet. In the 1980s and into his final years, he served as a close creative collaborator to none other than Kurosawa Akira. You know, the man widely considered to be the greatest Japanese filmmaker of all time. And these two produced some all-time classics together. Kurosawa's 1980 samurai epic Kagemusha, The Magical Dreams in 1990, just to name a few. Honda Ishirō passed away on February 28, 1993 from respiratory failure. His memorial service bringing together some of the great figures of Japanese cinema, including Kurosawa himself and the legendary Mifune Toshiro, who reportedly embraced in tears during the funeral. A fitting farewell for what was one of the most important creative minds in the history of not just Japanese film, but film at large. April 1st then became a national holiday for the nation of streetwear. On that day, a 23-year-old from Gunma Prefecture named Nagao Tomoaki opened a clothing store in Harajuku, and in doing so, gave birth to a little brand called a bathing ape, or simply, BAPE. Now, you might know it as that brand selling preposterously expensive shirts that Pharrell Williams is inexplicably devoted to. But its roots go back to that Tokyo Spring Day in 1993 when BAPE simply came out of nowhere. And I mean literally out of nowhere, because that was the name of the store that opened that day. As for that Nagao guy, he might be more familiar to my fellow rap enthusiasts under a different name entirely. Nigo. Member and in-house DJ of Japanese hip-hop supergroup Teriyaki Boys, and a good friend of the aforementioned Pharrell Williams and the Neptunes. But long before any of that, he was just a young guy fresh out of fashion college, working at Popeye Fashion magazine, with a dream of making and selling some genuinely cool clothing. So he borrowed 4 million yen from an acquaintance, moved into that same acquaintance's shop space in Harajuku, together with his good friend Takahashi Chun, launched Nowhere, with the ambition of becoming the go-to destination for a new, young generation of Japanese looking for a clean fit. The problem standing out among all the other Harajuku stores selling largely the same things. The solution, launching his very own exclusive in-house brand called a Bathing Ape, sold only at Nowhere. As for that weird brand name, which I know you're wondering about, it's an abbreviation of the phrase, a bathing ape in lukewarm water, referring to the act of lounging in a bath for so long that the water turns lukewarm, which in itself is a metaphor for the perceived laziness of the early 90s generation of young Japanese who, you know, happen to be the brand's exact target demographic. Mystery solved. And if you ask me, the shortened BAPE does roll off the tongue quite nicely. Since 1993, BAPE has grown into a genuine streetwear icon. Particularly back in the 2000s, when some of the biggest names in US hip-hop were proudly repping the brand in videos and at events. Does that mean I personally want to spend $125 on a split camo tee? Absolutely not. But BAPE's lasting impact on global street fashion is undeniable. So April 1st, 1993 is absolutely one of the most important dates in Japanese fashion history.
コマーシャルタイムです。
体が休みたい休みたい体体が休みたい休みたい体体が休みたい休みたい体肉体疲労時の栄養補給にグルクロノラクトン配合グロン酸の効果をお試しください。グロン酸強力内服液薬局薬店でどうぞ。5時から男のグロン酸中外製薬。
And now, time to pick up the pace, because one day in May of 1993, Toyota woke up and decided to casually drop one of the most iconic cars in its entire history. Ladies and gentlemen, the Toyota Supra A80, the Mark IV, one of the single most recognizable automobiles to anyone born, let's say somewhere between 1980 and 2000, and for a very good reason. The A80 was the fourth generation of a Toyota nameplate whose lineage traces back to the late 1970s, itself rooted in the iconic Celica and 2000 GT models. Big shoes to fill, and it filled them spectacularly. At the heart of the Supra's legend is of course the 2JZ engine, which in stock form produced somewhere in the region of 200 to 300 horsepower, deliberately held back by that infamous Japanese car manufacturer's gentleman's agreement. You know, where they all decided to not go too wild on power output anymore, partly as a nod to road safety. But here's the thing, the 2JZ's real magic wasn't what the factory gave you, it was what the engine could handle. Because the 2JZ, more than almost any other engine ever produced, can absorb an extraordinary amount of abuse, modification, and tuning. Translation, people took it to absolutely insane places, some builds pushing north of 1,000 horsepower. Thank God that gentleman's agreement doesn't extend to the customers. So the Mark IV Supra became a tuner's dream machine, a car that, in the right hands, could be transformed into something almost incomprehensibly fast. But besides that, it was also just really beautiful. Exotic looking in a rounded, approachable kind of way, with those iconic rear taillights that I think a majority of us spent hours staring at in whatever racing game was our poison of choice. And that is precisely how the Supra transcended the world of car enthusiasts, through entertainment. From those aforementioned video games to Paul Walker's famous Orange Beast in The Fast and the Furious, the film I will stand behind as genuinely solid cinema, and I am willing to die on that hill, the Mark IV Supra became something that pretty much every millennial kid fantasized about owning at some point. Among a lineup from the world's largest car manufacturer, which turns out iconic vehicles on a near-regular basis, the Mark IV Supra somehow still manages to stand apart. Just one more Japanese automotive legend, born in the 1990s. Also born in the 90s, Japan's football revolution. On May 15th, the J.League, Japan's first ever professional football league, kicked off with its inaugural match. Up until that point, football in Japan was strictly amateur territory. The JSL had existed since 1965, but its clubs were not professional outfits. The early 90s, however, fueled by a potent mix of inspiring highs and humbling lows, was the moment Japan finally woke up and decided it was probably about time to take the world's most popular sport a bit more seriously. The first, most obvious step toward becoming a footballing powerhouse was professionalizing the game at home. That evening in May of 1993, the league launched in spectacular fashion. 10 clubs competed in that inaugural season, with 2 of them doing the honors of kicking the whole thing off at Tokyo's National Stadium. End result, Kawasaki Verdy 1, Yokohama Marinos 2. Now, despite that opening night loss, Kawasaki came back strong over the course of the season and won the entire thing, becoming the first ever J.League champions in history. But the real opening statement came just one day after the league's launch, when Kashima Antlers legendary Brazilian midfielder Zico, yes, that Zico, scored the J.League's first ever hat-trick. Brazilian magic on Japanese soil, what's not to love? Since that inaugural season, the J.League has only grown. More teams, more divisions, a proper footballing pyramid with the introduction of the J2 and J3 leagues. But more importantly, the league became the engine room of Japanese football's transformation into Asia's dominant force, producing talent that would take Japan to their first World Cup in 1998, to co-hosting and the round of 16 in 2002, and to first place in an iconic group of death at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. More than 30 years on, the Japanese national team is now widely considered a genuine contender on the world stage. None of that happens without what was set in motion on the evening of May 15th, 1993. Go J.League! But from Japan's football boom to a whole different kind of boom. On June 28th, something extraordinary happened on the Japanese Oricon singles chart, when music label Being achieved what no label had done before, or has done since, when places 1 through 6 on the chart were all occupied by their own artists simultaneously. That's right, 6 consecutive chart positions, all from the same hit factory. The acts responsible: T-Boran, Bees, Sart, Zig Ref, Sart and Wants, Sig Again, and Tube. All rock bands, and all of them signed to Being. This moment was the peak of what is now known as the Being Boom, a period of near-total chart domination in the early 90s that saw Being artists top the singles chart for 18 consecutive weeks between March and July of 1993, their music seemingly inescapable across TV programs, commercials, and every other corner of Japanese media. And that chart sweep of June 28th, that was the crescendo. A landmark moment not just in Japanese music history, but in the history of Japanese rock specifically, which as of 1993 had made one thing crystal clear. It was here to stay.
Game of the Year.
On August 9th, Japan's post-war politics changed forever. On that day, Hosokawa Morihiro was sworn in as the 79th Prime Minister of Japan. And while a new PM is always a notable event, this one was genuinely historic. That day, Hosokawa, leader of the Japan New Party, became the first man to hold Japan's highest political office in the entire post-war era, without being a member of the Liberal Democratic Party. Or, well, not anymore. Technically, he had been an LDP man until 1992, when he decided to leave and found the new party, which then promptly won 35 seats in the July 1993 general election. Thus, the LDP lost its governing majority for the first time since 1955 and was replaced by an 8-party coalition with Hosokawa at the helm, which was unmistakably a sign of the times. The LDP had been lurching from one scandal to the next since the mid-80s, and now finally there were some real consequences. As for Hosokawa himself, his tenure was short but eventful. In less than a year in office, he made several unprecedented moves, including openly acknowledging Japan's role as an aggressor in World War II, which we all know too well is somehow still a controversial statement in this country. Besides that, he also pushed hard for genuine reforms, tackling bureaucratic inefficiency, overhauling election laws, cracking down on corporate political donations. Now, most of those ambitions ran straight into a wall, but the significance of his rise to power cannot be overstated. The LDP didn't recover its former dominance until 1996, making Hosokawa's victory one of the most seismic political shifts in modern Japanese history. One that wouldn't be repeated until the late 2000s. 2 days later, on August 11th, the devil was born in Tokyo. Or well, maybe not literally the devil, but certainly a child named Devil, which is close enough in my book. Now, the child in question had actually been born in late July, but August 11th was the day his parents walked into Akishima City Hall and submitted the birth registration. The name they had chosen for their bundle of joy, Akuma, Devil. And wouldn't you know it, the City Hall staff accepted it, and the little Devil-chan became a proud Tokyo citizen that you might think was that. It was not that. Word of the name spread from the City Hall staff to the authorities, then to the Tokyo Legal Affairs Bureau, whose chief made an executive decision. The name was inappropriate. He crossed out Akuma, wrote in name undecided, and informed the father accordingly. Months later, the story had reached Japan's biggest newspapers, a government cabinet meeting, and a nationwide public debate about naming rights that nobody quite saw coming. The Sankei Shimbun even ran a reader poll in the matter, with the vast majority agreeing that naming your child Devil was, broadly speaking, kind of a bad idea. Not exactly a scorching hot take, but regardless, the boy kept the name Akuma for 3 more years until 1996, when his parents divorced and his mother, who as it turned out had only reluctantly agreed to the name in the first place, because of course it was the husband's idea, filed for a name change. The boy, now 3 years old, finally got himself a reportedly normal name and got on with his life. The controversy, however, left a lasting mark on Japanese naming law. In 2004, 488 kanji characters were formally banned from use in personal names. So, the era of the Tokyo Devil was brief, but memorable. Goodbye Akuma-chan, hello, whatever your name is now. And speaking of banned Akumas, on August 19th, the legendary Ryogoku Kokugikan Arena in Tokyo hosted what was, by any measure, the coolest event of 1993. First official Street Fighter tournament ever held, the Street Fighter II Turbo Championship.
Street Fighter II Turbo Nihon Ichi Championship 93 in Kokugikan, Kanzen-Kirok.
7,000 competitors in 1993. Just let that number sink in for a moment. For context, EVO Japan 2026, part of the most prestigious fighting game tournament series on the planet, pulled in just over 7,000 entrants for Street Fighter VI. That means that Capcom's 1993 event was, until very recently, almost certainly the largest gaming tournament in history by sheer competitor count. Absolutely insane. The format was single elimination, played on the Super Famicom version of Hyper Fighting. Yep, no arcade hardware, the entire thing played on pad. Diabolical. And yet, the level of skill on display here was genuinely impressive. The spacing, the footsies, remarkable stuff for 1993, a time when competitive gaming as a concept was barely even a thing yet. Then you also had a real-life Chun-Li on hand to cheer competitors on, which, not gonna lie, I still dream about at least twice a week as a man in his early 30s. The man who eventually got first place at the tournament was a certain Nakano Sagat, who made the entirely sensible decision of playing, Sagat, and walked away later that day with a genuinely spectacular trophy. The story of Nakano Sagat doesn't end in 1993. He went on to win the Super Turbo tournament at EVO 2019, and to this day, he carries his original SF2 cartridge around as a business card holder. What a legend! But now, from 16-bit fighting to real, fleshy fisticuffs, September 21st, one of the earliest forerunners of modern mixed martial arts made its debut at Tokyo Disney Resort. No, seriously. The event carried the amazing title, Yes, We Are Hybrid Wrestlers 1, and was put on by a newly founded promotion company called Pancrase. Named after the ancient Greek combat sport Pancration, Pancrase was the brainchild of a group of former members of the Fujiwara-gumi pro wrestling promotion who had grown kind of disillusioned with their mentor's vision. He valued showmanship. They wanted to know what happened when a bunch of jacked up elite wrestlers actually fought each other for real. It wasn't an entirely new idea. Shuto had been exploring similar territory since the mid-1980s. Pancrase built their own version. In September of 1993, they were ready to debut at the Tokyo Bay NK Hall, a sporting arena situated within the grounds of Tokyo Disney Resorts. And it slapped. Literally. Competitors came in at peak condition, and spectators accustomed to the theatrical nature of traditional pro wrestling were genuinely shocked by the raw, unscripted combat they were witnessing. That shock, as it tends to do, generated curiosity. Future events grew the promotion's following steadily as MMA simultaneously began taking shape as a sport around the world. By 2000, Pancrase had brought its rule set much closer in line with the broader MMA landscape. To this day, it remains as one of the oldest and most respected MMA organizations on the planet. Its most famous sibling is obviously the American UFC, but with the first Pancrase event predating UFC 1 by just over a month, the vision behind this thing deserves full recognition.
コマーシャルタイムです。
新型清浄剤ワーキレイでエンジンきれい。レーサー100も日赤ダッシュもワーキレイ。日赤。すごい。真ん中に叩きつける。あれ。桜木くん、バスケット部に入るべきよ、絶対。そうっすか。そうよ、絶対よ。すごいわ。
And to close out 1993 in the most cinematic way possible, X Japan came home. X Japan returns, 2 concerts at the Tokyo Dome on December 30th and 31st, was not just the biggest musical event of that year in Japan, it was a statement. Just a little background for the uninitiated. X Japan are widely considered the godfathers of visual kei. Basically Japan's own answer to glam rock, with the hair and the stuff. Basically, X was enormously influential and enormously popular. Millions of records sold out tours, a devoted fan base. Then in 1992, the band set their sights on America. They replaced their bassist, relocated to LA, changed their name from X to X Japan, and signed with an American label. And then, almost nothing. their output ground to a halt. The only thing they released was their fourth album, Art of Life, in August of 1993, consisting of just one single track, nearly 30 minutes long, heavily orchestrated, and genuinely brilliant. But one epic song does not a comeback make. Back in Japan, fans felt abandoned. Not a single concert on home soil since January of 1992, a US album that never quite materialized, and a general sense that ex-Japan had bitten off more than they could chew and forgotten who got them there in the first place. But December of 1993 was the answer to all of that. After nearly 2 years away, ex-Japan returned to Japan for 2 nights at the Tokyo Dome to see out the year. And this New Year's Eve show, it was something special. As the clock crept toward midnight, the band launched into the full 30-minute Art of Life, playing it in its entirety as 1993 gave way to 1994. It was the perfect way of saying, we are back, and we mean it. And they were. New Year's Eve at the Tokyo Dome became a regular fixture of the band's annual calendar all the way until their disbandment in 1997. And the tradition of major New Year's countdown concerts at the Dome has continued with different acts every single year since. One iconic band, one beautiful tradition, and the perfect way to fire us headfirst into 1994. And that's a wrap on good old Q2 Sannen. I hope you enjoyed the ride, brought to you in part by me, and in large part by my team over on patreon.com/AnikiHistory. All of them, including the Hockey Gentleman, Saxofox, D-Fox, Saikajo, Khalid Lepta, Xoyabu, Tricoat, Kevin Hickson, Buns, Journeyman351, RK0, Michael Smith, Hajime no James, Utku Husenkaya, Steve Matsui, Hypanen, Javier Sodavia, Midnight Channel, Turom, Maruinu, Boo Boo Cakes, Chris Scott, Mickey Cox, CJ and Mary, Cats and Soup, Chart B-Man, Ben Harradine, White Gilden, Sierra DC, T-Bird, Metal Mama, Ian Farmer, Chris Wallace, J.R. Horse, Edeya Kono, Guillaume Clément y Garcia, Ilya Kuznirovic, Jay-Z, Quintet, Microhex, Jules Schönefus, Terminal, and Kita Kitsune Northern Fox. To all of you all-time greats, and to everyone else who tuned in today, I guess I'll see you next year? じゃあ、またね。
Aren't you about ready to go home now?